being in risk management, one of the underlying things I focus on is helping my clients uncover their savings rate. In other words, the percentage of money they deduct from their personal disposable income to set aside as a nest egg for their future. And then based on that rate, we explore alternative ways we can go about helping to increase their saving efforts. You know, I ask all of my clients, how much of your annual earned income are you saving versus what you should be saving? And a majority of them tell me, oh, I probably only save about 5% when I know I should be saving about 15 to 20%. And this is a common response I hear from my working class clients. I listen to them as they point out the issue themselves based on how much they should be saving compared to what they actually are. So what's the reason behind this? I often hear one of two things. It's always either I'm a terrible saver and I spend all my money, or I'm just not focusing on that right now. But regardless of the reason, everyone needs to be asking themselves the following 4 questions. How much am I capable of saving? Where am I putting it? How much am I spending? And what expenses can I reduce and or eliminate? Answering those 4 questions will really allow you to determine what your savings rate is per month. So why aren't people taking the initiative to start saving? What are their drawbacks? If I got $1 for every time I heard this, I'd be a billionaire by now. It's always the excuse of I'm still young or I can't afford it. And so right away my question becomes, well, how young is too young and how much is considered to be unaffordable? The reality is the younger we are by taking that initiative to start saving, the more we're simply ahead of the game and will only become more financially prepared than those who aren't taking that action. Now, when you're talking about affordability, you have to really self-reflect on not necessarily how much you're making, but rather some of the ways that you're spending your money and on what. What I find ironic is sometimes it's those individuals that sit in my office who are the ones on and off private jets taking trips every other weekend who describe themselves as terrible savers. Well, yeah, it's because they're terrible spenders. And according to some of them, they aren't financially in a position to put money away for their future. I've literally sat there in these meetings and have been told numerous times, you know, Gus, I don't know if I can afford to save X amount of dollars per month. But guess what? These people are sharing story after story on how much they spend for leisure just prior to our conversation. Now, this point goes all the way to folks who don't necessarily live that kind of lavish lifestyle, but rather go to a fancy restaurant once or twice a week. I mean, really think about that. You could easily save yourself a few $100s a month by not eating out as often as you might, or not purchasing that extra pair of designer shoes when you're out shopping. And guess what? That couple $100s will go a far way, at least as a starting point. The point is you don't need to be a high net worth individual to start taking action. As long as you're saving within your means, going back to your savings rate, whatever that may be, well then there is no such thing as not being able to afford it. Because there are people who can save $50 a month and those that can save tens of thousands of dollars a month. If people really look at what their fixed expenses are and compare that to some of the unnecessary things they're out purchasing, well then they'd realize it. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're comparing cutting back on a fancy dinner, a night out, or a vacation. It doesn't matter what financial realm he's in or what working class she's in. I can't afford it is simply an excuse. That's all it is. It's just an excuse. You know, one thing I've noticed is we often have a tendency to judge someone's financial strength based on how much they currently make. But if you think about it, someone who makes $300,000 a year isn't to say he or she's going to be more financially well off than someone who makes $50,000 a year. Because I could make that $300,000, but what good is it for my future if I don't properly save any of it, and instead I'm just spending it on irrelevant things? Meanwhile, that person who makes $50,000 is managing 20% of their income for savings. So at the end of the day, it's not about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep, and that's where wealth is really created. Only about 50% of the working class are saving for their future, and 64% of that group have a savings rate of 5% or less. 5% or less. The other 50% are saving absolutely nothing. Zero. Zip. Now, if you fall in either one of those categories, you have to ask yourself, well, what is that going to look like for me long term? We have to view this whole idea of taking action not as an option, but rather a self-obligation. We have to educate ourselves on the importance of saving for our future and understanding what approaches we should be taking so we don't face financial insecurity. So while we reflect on that, again, we have to be mindful of this. It's not about how much money you make, it's about how much money you keep. And taking that initiative to begin saving for your future is what's going to separate you from the other half of the working class who aren't taking that action.